Mike isn't a troll. He's just he's a hardcore like 1.0 sandbox player. So for those of you who don't know, very passionate. I love talking with Mike, aka Mr. R YouTube. So just note that like he's very passionate. I always like him. Like we agree on a lot of things, we'll disagree on a few things. So no, I wouldn't classify him as a troll. I just classify him as somebody who like really just feels strongly exactly about like what they're talking about. So for those of you on just on Twitch, like there's conversation going on about job crystals and whatnot in classes. In fact, actually, like if we're going to talk about what I wish 2.0 did differently, it would literally be I wish they would have just deleted classes and just went right with the jobs. Like I would have changed the the guild system itself and just gone with that, because ever since that point, after like Ninja was the last class the game ever added, and we've just seen job, 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 and I've always wondered if spare no expense would mean that we would go back and literally just like groundswell this game in terms of like, listen, what are the classes? Like we don't use them. There's not any value to them. There was value to them in 1.0 because classes ended up becoming your solo play style and jobs became party.
Unless they've done different, right? Never shorten the XP curve because now you level up so fast. Never shorten that. But then instead said, I don't know the lore ramifications of this, but instead said that like Thaumaturge also got the Red Mage job crystal and also got the Machinist job crystal or whatever. Just insert anything here, right? And so if they had instead continued, if they kept the same number of base classes in the game and every other job that's ever added, Gunbreaker, Dark Knight, all of them were just nested job stones inside of the other classes, then I think the classes would still have a lot of meaning to them as these kind of core mentalities of combat or these core mentalities of interacting with Ether or whatever thread they chose to weave.
That would have been a great solution in my opinion. I actually 100% agree. Right.
Right. It's downstairs.
And then yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden that's where you start to kind of have this hybrid sub job almost kind of system. Like, oh, you're a this is your class, and then you pick a stone that ends up modifying that to like varying degrees. Like that would have been an interesting system. But what we end up having is it's not even an upgrade system. It literally is a requirement. It literally transitions the story into it. And it just feels very disconnected. And as a veteran 1.0 player, as somebody who looks back at the core of this game right now, that's something that I would love for them to sit here and say, look, this is our original vision. It didn't play out the way that we thought that it would. Let's readdress all of this because
it's too late.
Well, it is. And that's where it's like, is it better for them to go ahead and just say 7.0, 8.0, like Yoshi P wants to make a new MMO. Like when they talk about 10 years of support, like, maybe that means some more expansions, etc. But does that make more sense to sit here and say like, yeah, we really need a new MMO? Like when we start looking at a next generation 2030 and beyond, right? Over the course of the next couple of years, like we got New World, and we're going to be talking about that here in a second. But you also have Ashes of Creation, which will either save the genre or unfortunately will cause people to never look at MMOs again, according to certain content creators who state, I don't know what I'll do if Ashes isn't a good game. And that has me absolutely concerned because I think Ashes will do exactly what Ashes will do. And then you have like things like Blue Protocol, and you have things like Pantheon. So there is an interesting new technology evolution, but we know that those are always going to be content lacking because you can't compete with 20 years of content with a launch of a game. And though that's why you got to have that kind of build up. But then you start looking at like Final Fantasy 14, it's like 10 years. Like, okay, that literally takes us into the 2030s. How is this game going to visually compare if New World continues to develop itself? If Ashes of Creation continues to develop itself, I think it will struggle, when you start to look at like people who are coming of age, stepping into an MMO, like there's systems that I think could be really revolutionary that I think Yoshi P's got so much data that he could like say, okay, here's our plan. And so you start thinking after 16, what's next? What's next for Final Fantasy? Like, anyway, that's...
And it could move to be something really positive. It doesn't mean that all of us will like it, right? One of the hard things about aging as a gamer is you have 10, 20, 30 games in a genre under your belt, and you're picturing the best of your favorite moments in each of them,
Mhm.
each as they were at the time. And so
Yeah.
you remember games as being graphically beautiful that right now may not hold up, and they may not have been done in an art style where it appears vintage. It may just appear bad.
Yeah.
And so like we're kind of jaded by that, and yet you're designing for all of gamers. And so like as my nephew is getting into his very first games, and he's just now getting to where like he's done his homework and he's being respectful to his parents, that he gets time on the Switch every day. And as he continues to grow in independence and grow into a young man, and one day be college age, he's going to have these strong developed opinions on games that released in 2018, 2023,
Mhm.
2030. Those are going to be the games that shape his view of gaming. And that means as a result, a lot of those games got to be games that he went in blind and saw concepts he'd never seen before. And it blew his mind,
Mhm.
even though those might be rehashes in our mind, might be a rehash of something, oh, it was way better back when I did it. And so I think as we also look at this, we need to recognize that as gaming continues to change, it's changing for all of us. And
Yeah.
so I've seen, we've been mentioning a lot of content creators today, but I've seen content creators that when you listen to them, it seems like I think maybe as different genres have shifted and as you yourself have grown, it might be time for you to step into a different genre, because you're getting to the point where all you're doing is complaining about the genre you're in. And the things you're asking for are actually where there's another genre that has moved towards those.
Yeah.
And so somewhere in here, you may have accidentally crossed into being a different kind of gamer. And that's a bit of an identity crisis where it's like, well, no, I've always been an MMORPG player. It's like action
Yeah.
RPGs may be the better fit now because action RPGs have grown, and action RPGs are actually doing and focusing on a lot of the things that you're describing. It might be worth giving a few a shot.
Yeah.
And that'll be where we're at. You and I may shift into games where, like, if everything becomes kind of a battle royale game in our genre, then we may shift to something else. So, like,
Well,
that's
it could
okay.
end up being that it's the shift ends up dropping the first, M in the M, and it just is like an action multiplayer online Diablo 4. Could they could launch Diablo 4 in such a good state, and if Diablo 4 is so good, all of the things that would hold people back and that they've had issue with slowly start to disappear. That conversation goes and says like they either fixed it or like, don't bring politics into this. Like I just want to enjoy this game, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's when I talk about that, it's like, let's just be honest about ourselves as gamers. Like good games have a tendency to cure any of the things that can ail us or frustrate us. Like they could launch Diablo 4 and it's so good they could bring in loot boxes and people would be like, wow, this is great. Like they'll defend it because the game has that. But you have to have that as a kind of a first and foremost. Now, I saw Cole in chat and I had it pinned up here on the thing talking about the graphical update. I'm glad they're doing a graphical update. However, I don't think that makes a better Final Fantasy 14. I think Final Fantasy 14 is beautiful. I think it's going to get better looking, and it's interesting that they're doing that. But I think gameplay and systems are absolutely critical. And the Yoshi P's talked about some of these things, bringing an updated friends list, like all of these things that just need, some TLC, some tender loving care, and hopefully maybe 7.0 is that. Maybe 7.0 is the time in which that we don't get new jobs, but we actually get them kind of doing a whole battle system, job, class, looking at the system as a whole, quality of life. Obviously, we're going to get the story itself. But when you start looking at the jobs that we do have, I know that there's jobs that aren't in the game right now that people still want to see, right? Like if they went and announced Time Mage, I would freak the F out. I would be like, finally. But if they also went and announced a Time Mage for Final Fantasy 11, I would freak the F out. Like that's the job that I've wanted in an online Final Fantasy game for a long time. So I am with them on what job would I like to see, right? But like at this point in the game, graphical updates, I don't think unless what they just kind of showed is a very tip of the iceberg, and then all of a sudden 7.0 comes out and you're like, this is exactly the next phase of this game, then I don't think that's going to be enough to actually start to draw people in terms of either re-inviting people back or inviting them in for the first time. What do you think, Chris?
I think that I would love to see them just use the graphical update as a chance to go back and think through that content, right? The time that it takes to go back and pull those assets. And, as I do Heavensward cutscenes and you see banners and stuff, that like the icon that's on the chess piece is now scaled up to whatever size they need. And it just looks terrible, especially because it's not just one equal level of pixelization. It's massive pixelated image next to really detailed image. So like it really shows where the assets just weren't meant to be scaled to that size. As you do that, that is an opportunity to say, do we need to rework this dungeon? Which they've done. When you see Toto Rock, it's a totally different experience. And so ideally you're going through and you're saying, yes, we need to adjust the camera angles. We need to adjust the lighting. We need to adjust the textures. As we do that, do we change these UI elements? Do we change the storytelling? Do we change this? And I hope that as we get into the open world, it's a neat chance to change. Do we change some of the Fate spawn locations? There is nothing worse than being in a Leave and a Fate spawns. And yeah, we've gotten rid of some of that by covering it up by saying like, crafters and gatherers don't get attacked by things. But like, that's just a band-aid to something that like, it's weird that they didn't have a map that has every possible event overlaid. And they just said, hey, we have 6 things happening in the same spot. Can one of those move up the hill by 50 feet? Because it would just clean it up just in case somebody ever like all these little tiny things that have a chance to be friction when somebody picks up the game for the first time. And they may not be things that those of us that already love the game need, but we're talking about continuing to grow the base. We're talking about people who are starting Final Fantasy for their very first time today, next year, 2 years from now. And in 2025, it's going to be weird when they're expected to still clear from ARR all the way up, if that's still the case by then, and they have to see some of these areas, whether they be graphical or not. There's still some clumsiness that today's technology and hindsight can inform. So I would love for them to kind of have a chance to step that up and just remaster the game step by step. Now, you and I would love some additional features while we're at it. Like if we're going to have a class system, I'd love to be able to have a sub job when I'm out in solo content. Because in solo content, not all classes feel identical. I actually really like the way Machinist feels. I really don't like the way some of the healers feel. It feels a little clumsy to me. I don't like the way Black Mage feels in open world content personally, because I find that like I want to use my big AoEs and I don't feel like I can pull big. But if I could sub job, then maybe I could bring a job and kind of move it into that halfway step between it and limited bit. And then I'm saying, but in dungeon and trial content, leave it exactly the same. When I'm with other people, leave it the same, because they can fill my weaknesses. But when I'm out on my own, maybe as we learn more about lost actions in deep dungeon and all that, maybe we can find a way, whether that's picking up off another class or that's picking up off of, I don't know. It would be really cool if the open world content, we could be a little more powerful. And then my question would be, okay, now can the open world content develop content that allows us to show that off? Because right now they can't. If they put something scary out in the open world, there will be some classes that just struggle with it.
Well, and that's been the weakness, and it's kind of a twofold, because Yoshi P knows that if you make hard open world content, you have to have people actually in that zone, and otherwise it's just and how do you do that? And they solve that in the instant server with Eureka within Bozia. Now we do not and haven't heard about like a new exploratory zone coming as a part of Endwalker, but as we look forward to the future, if they go with a Guild Wars 2 model where they make the zones where it's like pulling from the data center, funneling into the zone, so the zones are populated, then all of a sudden you can start to design open world content that's designed around people being there and doing things. And Fates what they've done with Fates in Bozia, like it was so good. Like it was so good because then all of a sudden it also opens up the opportunity for even more things. And what it ended up doing, one of the fun things I enjoy about that, is it then allowed people to kind of form parties, and you start meeting people as a social experience that isn't just glamour, that isn't just like, dancing around in Limsa in your underwear. Like you have social experiences that are actually around battle content that don't expire in 20 minutes if you're good, or 40 minutes if you suck, and it's like ultimately you end up having this like really cool organic experience. Whether that builds relationships down the road is another thing, and that's another system that could open itself up. And that's where, when you start to look at, like when I start to look at what I've wanted in this game for such a long time, it's like I want them to take advantage of these beautiful zones, especially if they're getting more beautiful with a graphical update, and then also fill them as a part of the kind of the core content itself. I would love to be able to level outside of the hunts in the open world as an option. Like you start looking at what Guild Wars 2 did a decade ago with bonus experience for enemies that haven't been killed in forever. Like they just been up in the zone, and then you're like, well, you know, you go kill them, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that was worthwhile, you know. And so that's ultimately where it's like, gosh, there's so much potential in 14's future. The question is that potential hindered by some of the decisions that were made over a decade ago? And my hope is that it hasn't been. But the only way to kind of really find that out is that if we see Yoshi P and his team kind of, and we understand, we as we start to learn what spare no expense means to Yoshi P versus what we think it might mean.
I think as a final note of the open world stuff and where it could go from here is that's also what helps with missed class balance.
Mm-hmm.
One of the worst parts of having a class you identify with is that if it gets pushed out, if you are somebody who's on the top end, if you like extreme savages and ultimates, and your class ends up in a weakened state where it gets pushed out of that community for any length of time, dungeons feel pretty lackluster. And so the fact that there's not more challenging content, maybe Criterion slides into that role, I don't know. Maybe Deep Dungeon again slides into that role. But if I could be doing my open world stuff, you know, on Machinist, and then I had to slide onto Dancer for my static, that helps in my mind to ease that pain a little, that my class still has a value. And like Machinist, you know, how does it perform in PvP and all that? What I don't want is like, oh, well, because it performs well in these 3 modes, it's not allowed to perform well elsewhere, or it's fair that it sucks elsewhere. It's just like, how do we ease the blow when we miss it? Obviously, we want perfect balance on all things all the time, but that's not reality.
Yeah.
So when they miss the mark, do they have to miss the mark across the board?
Yeah.
Because that stings a little bit more. So I hope as they go back and remaster, they can kind of continue to reinvent the world. And it's not just graphics, because graphics on their own, these graphics will one day be outdated. The new ones that we haven't even gotten yet will one day be outdated. But what's not outdated is good gameplay. It's emotional attachment to characters. It's that meaning. You know, you hear that phrase, I saw it in chat, beauty fades. Yeah, physical beauty fades, aesthetic beauty fades. But, you know, you mentioned that, like, I'm about to take some time off to celebrate 10 years of being married to my wife. And yes, when I see pictures of us, we looked more youthful and had better skin and were configured in a more aesthetically pleasing shape with less around the middle when we 10 years ago. But as I look back over all of the pictures, as we've gone back and we pulled some pictures and stuff to send to family who've asked, what all have you guys done over the last 10 years? When we send them pictures of us from the Grand Canyon, we send them pictures of us from and all these places we've been, I see as we've aged. But I also am reminded of how much our relationship's grown, and that beauty, it only grows. And so as we look back at this game, as we do a remaster, as we go back and do these, I hope it's not just graphical, because that's a temporary fix, and it's a lot of resources for a temporary fix.
Yeah.
So I hope that it can go back and tune things like Toto Rock, where they can go back and say, like Battle at the Big Bridge or whatever, where they can say, this just needs to be different. This is just wrong.
Absolutely. Now, as we kind of transition, as that's our bonus topic for this special live show, just we that's 2 in a row, 2 special hidden bonus topics that come up. I do want to say thanks. What's up, Code Breaker? We haven't played in a long time since they did the data center split. And I'm hoping that at some point that the fact that you're hanging out here in chat means that we can team up again. Always is a pleasure playing with Code, dude. That was the hardest part about that transition. That there were some people within our community here that just we weren't able to play with. And also, we're about to go talk about Brimstone Sands in the PTR. Do we need to like run an ad? Because I was going to let you guys know. Yeah, I was going to let you guys know.
Twitch is a timer for Twitch.
Yeah, if y'all have Amazon Prime, like you have if you can. Chris and I right now are both actually relying on YouTube and Twitch revenue more than we ever have. Before my case, I really use the revenues around the time I got sick with COVID because I don't have PTO, but like it's a crazy world. So if you guys do have Amazon Prime, it's a great and awesome free way to support us. We also here over on YouTube have the $1 membership level as a tier, kind of an entry level. You'd be surprised, but that goes a long way. So over on YouTube, whether you guys can or, like if you can't, no worries. Support is by being here. Support is liking these videos and lurking on the streams and the live streams. But yeah, every little bit right now goes a long way. And so the only downside about Prime is that you got to have to like remember to put that on each and every month. It does not auto renew off that. So thank you guys for the support. Also, why Final Fantasy 11 dropping their Prime sub. So if we do get to the goal of 850 points right now, which we're coming up on 500, we like to do these big bonus streams in which we kind of like do crazy things. Last one was an achievement hunter. So guys, just note that that support means the world to us right now. Hopefully I won't have to rely on it for, for longer. Otherwise it's going to be like, you'll see a lot of Brian content because it's going to be just, I guess, the way of the world for the time being.